Hey everyone, Gill Gross here, post-match. Jannik Sinner versus Daniil Medvedev, Miami Open 2024 semifinal. If you're not here for spoilers, click off the video. Sinner hands Medvedev what is tied for the worst defeat of his career. Jannik drops just 3 games, wins it 6-1, 6-2, advances to his third career Miami Open final. Not a competitive match, not a long match, but yet another fascinating chapter in a rivalry that has swung wildly the other direction in the last 6 or so months. Medvedev won the first 6. It is now 5 straight wins for Jannik Sinner. So before I get into this match specifically, let's address a central question that had already existed, but after the most comprehensive Sinner win in the rivalry so far, the question is now being written in all caps and red lettering. How big is the Jannik Sinner problem for Daniil Medvedev? And I'm going to go back on something that I said yesterday when I did the preview for this match that some of you may have seen. And I picked Sinner to win. And it wasn't because I couldn't imagine a scenario that Medvedev would win. My real issue right now, my real concern from Medvedev's perspective is just how many different ways Sinner has managed to beat him, which highlights the array of advantages that Jannik may have in any given match over Daniil Medvedev, which was even different from when Medvedev won 6 in a row. And I was questioning Sinner's tactics because every time it looked the same. And it was, Jannik, when are you going to adapt? When are you going to try something different here? The same criticism cannot be levied on Medvedev because he has changed, he has adapted, and nothing has worked. So it's a pretty big problem that Medvedev has on his hands. I mean, we've seen, the first thing that we saw Sinner do was introduce variety to beat Medvedev's defense. Serve and volley, drop shots, shorter angles, +1 approaches. Then we saw Sinner get so solid from the back of the court. Movement, fitness, consistency. We never had the ability to change direction often. We never had to worry about his power. He got so good from the back of the court that there were matches where Sinner beat Medvedev in his own game, that they stood behind the baseline and they just exchanged blows and Sinner won. And that is where I think Daniil looked at it and it was, wow, Jannik has a lot of options now. He's beaten me multiple ways. Time for me to change. So now that gets us to what happened here. The phase 3, if you will, of this Sinner-Medvedev rivalry. Daniil adjusts, but he doesn't get the results that he's looking for because there are trade-offs. So first, let's talk about what Sinner did here. Because Sinner was ready for Medvedev to kind of copy and paste the Australian Open tactics that Daniil used to go up 2-0. And I think the logic for Medvedev was pretty sound. It would go something like this. What I did in Australia worked. It was effective. By the way, not just against Sinner. It was effective against Zverev. It was effective against Hurkacz. Some of the things that he was doing, upping the aggression, coming forward a little bit more at times, redlining the ground stroke speeds at times, and returning from closer in, right? So all that stuff worked. In Australia, I didn't have any options, and I was one-dimensional because I had no legs. So what I'm going to do here in Miami, I'm going to use the same tactics, but hopefully it's going to work out this time because I have good tactics, I have aggressive tactics, but I also can fall back on my legs if and when I need them. I think that was the thought process. Sinner this time, though, was not caught off guard by how Medvedev was playing. Clearly in Australia, he was like shell-shocked. It was shocking because he had played Daniil so many times and never had Medvedev played remotely like how he did in the first 2 sets in Australia. Jannik didn't react well from a level standpoint. I think mentally he just wasn't ready for it, and he was a little bit sloppy, not really reacting well. And I won't get into full detail just yet, right? So this time Sinner was ready for it mentally and tactically. So first I'll say tactically, the introduction of the body serve in this match. So the theme of this analysis, as is the theme of many analysis on this channel, is trade-offs. Because no tactics are good and no tactics are bad in tennis. It doesn't exist. There are positives and negatives to everything you do. When Medvedev was standing deep, the positive was that he was making all his returns in play and forcing Sinner to execute. The negative was that Sinner started serving wide every time and hitting first ball drop shot, serve and volley, or first ball approach, right? So now Medvedev stands in. That gives Sinner now the ability to try to get more free points. And I haven't looked into the numbers, but what he definitely did early on was, I am going to establish the body serve, because I think in the scouting, when they looked at it, what do we do to Medvedev when he stands close? How do we respond to that? And he is not all that comfortable when you jam him up. He has not figured out how to be comfortable against the body serve when he's standing close. So that was one thing. The second thing was, I think there was a decision to double down on patience and consistency. This was genius. It was brilliant, because Sinner was so solid and so patient, which was a very different reaction from what he did in Australia. Sinner got very edgy in Australia and was trying to take back control when Medvedev was hitting big. This time he was, okay, if Daniil is going to play ultra aggressive and redline his ground stroke speeds, that's fine. We'll play some D. We'll D up and we'll win the game of errors. We will bank on Daniil being more inconsistent as a result of his change in tactics. Sinner was a brick wall here. Jannik was so solid from the back. The decision-making was incredibly sound, particularly off the backhand. It was basically a model in shot selection. Anytime the ball was deep or low or quick, right? Any of the factors for an incoming ball that makes it difficult to change direction, Sinner went cross. But also, anytime it was shorter, anytime it was slower, anytime it sat up a little bit, Sinner was very willing at that point to redirect and hit the backhand down the line. It was very Djokovic-like, textbook, perfect shot selection from Sinner. But the result was extreme consistency on Jannik's end. And that's a good segue into the negative trade-offs that Medvedev experienced as a result of his tactical changes. What happens when you redline the ground stroke speed? What happens when you play less through the middle of the court and introduce the sideline as an obstacle? Because you're trying to achieve more width and you're shrinking your targets. What happens when you change direction more with your forehand down the line? Right? There is a trade-off there. It was remarkable in Australia that we didn't really see that trade-off play out for Daniil. But in this match, it did. And Medvedev, who, I don't need to tell you this, I think everybody watching and listening knows that this guy is one of the most metronomic, ruthlessly consistent players on tour from the back of the court. He wasn't. Why? Because he wasn't playing himself in this match. He was a different player. He wasn't the Daniil Medvedev that usually takes the court, right? He was bringing a completely different style to the table. And it's not what he does best, right? His forehand especially is not reliable enough when he asks it to be extremely aggressive. It's just not reliable enough. So Sinner wins the game of errors in that respect. The volleys weren't there for Medvedev. When he tried to come forward, when he tried to force his way in, there were major execution problems in that respect. And I mentioned the return of serve as well, right? Struggling to return the body serve. That's also an example of a tactical trade-off. I also think that mental scar tissue from the head-to-head showed for Medvedev after set one. He started rushing, and he started making some of the worst choices I've ever seen Daniil Medvedev make. Like some of the forehand down the line that he played on the run from difficult positions. Some of the net approaching that I saw from him was low percentage stuff that you rarely see from Daniil. What I want to stress in this on this topic is a lot of the work that Sinner did to win the match today was work that he didn't do at all today. He did it in the previous 4 matches. He got Medvedev to take the court, to leave his comfort zone stylistically, but also when that didn't work, it was panic city for Daniil. Because at that point, again, there was a lot of scar tissue built up, and Medvedev didn't react all that well to losing the first set 6-1. One more thing going back to the preview. Sinner outserved Medvedev. There are 2 ways you could look at this. One, Jannik has become one of the best serve return players in the world. He is in tier 1 in that respect with Djokovic and with Medvedev. Players who win the battle of cheap, easy points, who give themselves better opportunities to play neutral in return games and play offense on serve games. Medvedev still has to win this, in my opinion, if he wants to beat Djokovic, Sinner, Alcaraz. Against 98% of players, he can beat him from the baseline. He can absolutely do that, but I still feel that Sinner and Alcaraz and Djokovic, they are too dynamic for Daniil for the most part, especially the offensive repertoire that Alcaraz and Sinner have developed as of late. They're too dynamic. Medvedev needs to outserve them. He hasn't as of late. And for me, that kind of dooms Daniil. He needs to figure out a way to do it. And I don't think that's a tactical thing. Now, yes, there's stuff with the return position where he's caught between a rock and a hard place. And I think we'll get more into that later. But in terms of the serve quality, yeah, it's just he needs to have a great serving day. And I don't know that he's been able to do that against Sinner and Alcaraz recently. So next time for Daniil, I think he needs to find some sort of a balance, some sort of a hybrid, because he did in the last few games go back to playing more conservative tennis from the back of the court and just making Jannik earn it. And things did get more competitive when Medvedev made that change. So I feel there needs to be a balance at some point in time for Medvedev where he is introducing the closer return position. He is picking his spots to inject pace and be aggressive off the ground and even come in sometimes. But if Daniil is not playing consistent from the back of the court, then really, what is he as a player? It really takes away the essence of what makes him good. The other thing I want to credit Sinner for was just towards the end of the match when Medvedev did make that change and he got more solid from the back. Terrific focus by Jannik. He never relaxed. He never took a single point for granted, even when he was up big. Darren was on him. Like when you listen to Cahill in the box, even when it was 6-1, 4-1, or anything of the sort. Cahill, after every point, was like, come on now, here we go, right now. Or that's it, right? There was a lot of dialogue, I think even more so than probably what was at the beginning of the match, because Cahill wanted to make sure that he stayed locked in and didn't let Daniil back in. And Jannik really responded to that, in my opinion, with terrific focus down the stretch, because Medvedev had found a better level. The last thing I want to say is on a very positive note, this has been a beautiful rivalry. It's been the best kind of rivalry because both players have been enriched by this rivalry. And I know what you might say at this point is, Gill, what are you talking about? How has Medvedev been enriched? He's now lost 5 matches in a row and he just got the brakes beaten off of him. And I'll explain in a moment. For Sinner, it's a lot more obvious. Daniil has pushed him to improve the drop shots, to improve the volleys, to hit more short angles and not just try to blast the ball through the baseline and win by rushing his opponents, which was his default way of winning in the first 3-4 years of his career, was just pace, 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 rush, rush, rush. That was pretty effective, right? Like, you can win a lot of matches that way. Ask Andrei Rublev. But he couldn't beat Medvedev that way. You can also ask Rublev about that. So Sinner was able to successfully make those adaptations. But for Medvedev, he's also made the changes. They have not given him the desired result. Where I would zag, what I would push back against, is any notion that Daniil won't get a positive result in the long run. There are a couple things I want to stress here. The first thing is that this is still early doors for Medvedev. He should get better at the close return position. He should get better, potentially, at taking the ball early, at redlining his ground stroke speeds, at coming forward and volleying. All of these things are things that it's not a given, it's not a guarantee, but in theory, the more he does these things in matches, the more reps he gets at these things, the better he's going to get. And a willingness to do them is step one. And I will remind you that Sinner tried those, a lot of the things that we're praising Sinner for nowadays, he tried unsuccessfully a lot. The drop shots in the first half of last year were ugly. It potentially lost him a couple matches because these things take time. The second thing is that Daniil Medvedev is getting older. And even if beating Sinner will always be a step too far, that he'll never really have consistent success against Jannik ever again, or that, Alcaraz will continue to kind of create a gap against Daniil Medvedev, right? Let's say some of these things happen. I would still contend that what Sinner has forced Medvedev to do, even if it doesn't help him reverse the head-to-head against Sinner, it's going to help him transition into the next phase of his career whenever he loses some speed, because at some point he'll lose some speed. He is, what is he, 28? Let me check that. I always forget with Medvedev. Yeah, he's 28. So 29, 30, he's 6'6". He does a lot of running to play his normal style. At some point, he's going to have to, if he wants to age well and keep winning, into his old age, these are things that he's going to have to start to do. So I think in the long run, it's very clear that this rivalry has enriched Sinner. I believe it will enrich Medvedev as well. But right now, Jannik has so many of his bases covered against Daniil. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you next time.